All right. Y'all ready to start it up? Rock and roll. Thank you much. Okay, so we finished last class. We talked about King Philip's War, Metacom's War. We also talked about the Pequot Wars. What I want to look at today is how those wars brought the New England colonies together and created some colonial unity. So I don't care if you have your notes pulled up on your Chromebooks, or if you just got your notebook out, whatever you want to do here. Also, you might want to pull your review out as well. Leave that up to you. So 4 of the colonies, as a result of the Pequot Wars, came together to form a bit of an alliance as a result of those wars. So really the idea behind them coming together is really about protection. Most of them were Puritan, or at least Congregationalist. Remember, Puritans are Congregationalists. They're coming from 4 colonies. They're coming from Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, New Haven, and they're also coming from Connecticut. We're still a ways away from Massachusetts absorbing Plymouth and Connecticut absorbing New Haven. Rhode Island is not involved in this particular confederation. This is a loose confederation, and it is one established for defense, but it's also one that is establishing a common treasury. So with that, it's an early sign of unity, but it's also an early formation of a commonwealth. Have you ever heard of the term commonwealth before? Of course you have. You live in a commonwealth, right? But now we are a commonwealth in name. Essentially, every state could be a commonwealth because they make laws for the good of their people, and they are ruled by their people on the consent of the governor. You guys have any questions over there? Thanks. So, with that being said, they are going to come together for the common good of their people, and they're essentially like an early republic. So if we look at the formation of this confederation and the events that lead up to the Glorious Revolution in colonial America, I mean, Glorious Revolution occurs in England, but there are events that lead up, that are mounting in colonial America up to the Glorious Revolution. You're going to see some similarities to much of the same issues that were going on in the pre-revolutionary era. Remember, Charles II restores the crown after the death of Cromwell, but as we already know, Charles II and the Puritans in New England don't necessarily see eye to eye. Massachusetts, for the most part, ignored Charles II's orders. The most significant laws that the people of Massachusetts ignored were actually laws that had been established by Cromwell. Have you ever heard of navigation acts before, or navigation laws? These are laws that were passed on colonies, and it didn't just happen in the British colonies, it happened in other colonies as well. And what it said was that a group of colonies were not allowed to trade with rival nations. So for example, navigation laws passed by Cromwell and passed by Charles II said that the American colonies were forbidden to trade their natural resources. And remember, they weren't producing many finished products. You could count rum, but for the most part, we're only looking at, lumber, tobacco, rice, indigo, other agricultural products. Those had to go to the mother country. That created that system of mercantilism that we talked about, where there's a colonial economy that depends on the production of the mother country. And it also has a lot of dependence on slave labor, which we'll talk a little bit about later. As punishment toward Massachusetts not following navigation laws and not following Charles II's orders, Connecticut will receive a royal charter, Rhode Island will receive a royal charter, New Hampshire will receive a rural charter, and Massachusetts' rural charter will be revoked. Now, in one of my other classes, somebody brought up, well, that seems a little contradictory or hypocritical, considering that these people may have come together for unity, but they weren't necessarily ready to take a step toward independence. And I think that that was a really great point that that student brought up. So you have to keep in mind, they don't have the population to launch a true revolution at this period of time. Not to mention that these smaller colonies still depend on the crown for what? Resources? Yes. Finished products? What else? What were you going to say back there? Exactly. Very good. Leadership. Nice job. Well done, Connor. So who else? Who else has anything else they want to add there? What else might a colony want out of a royal charter? Yes, protection as well. Excellent work. Good job, Hunter. All right. So let's take a look at what the New England Confederation did. You have a group of commissioners that are elected. You have colonial governments, militia put into force, common treasury put into play. But these are also, it's kind of cool to take a look at, common treasury. Now you got financial interests. A militia force does more than just provides protection. What does the militia force also do socially? Yeah, it provides protection, but what might a group of people that come together to serve for military protection, what might that do for them socially? Yeah, it provides like esprit de corps, right? It provides some camaraderie. It brings them together. We're taking care of ourselves. We're coming together. And it actually, we already know that not everybody in Massachusetts, Plymouth, Connecticut, and New Haven, they might not have all seen eye to eye. But the common good of raising the militia and the common good of putting together that treasury, that could have bound them together. And it most certainly did. And we're going to see that occur in the next chapter of this forming of New England and a little political dissension in New England as well. Did you guys have any questions about the New England Confederation? All right. So Charles II passes away, and his brother, the Duke of York, James II, takes power. Be sure that Charles II will wind up on the test, because Charles II is going to be instrumental in building the colonies, right? Not like, at his own hand, but remember, the restoration of the crown leads to the colonization of the Carolinas, the land grant of Pennsylvania. It also leads to the overthrow of New Amsterdam. In 1664, England basically takes New Amsterdam without firing a shot. And they do so because the Dutch don't want to be under military rule any longer, and they're happy, hey, if you give us autonomy and autocratic rule, you guys will follow English law, and you let us be Dutch, we'll follow English law, and you guys can control us. And that's why this is a bloodless, I wouldn't even call it a bloodless war. It wasn't even a war, so to speak. There was more blood shed at sea between England and the Dutch. Yeah?
The Dutch were camps and all that, all their colonies like that, were they really upset about that?
The military leader, Peter Stuyvesant, was furious, but he knew that it was more of a referendum on his leadership than it was as like a motion toward the Dutch. Another thing that you have to realize too, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, the Dutch are pretty much are controlled by two organizations. Like the royal family and everybody in Holland is controlled by the VOC, which was the Dutch East India Company, and the WIC, the Dutch West India Company. So Ian, to answer your question, investors weren't thrilled about it. So there were more people that were angered by it in terms of finances than they were militarily, but they also knew that the English may have political control, but the Dutch would still have financial control, and ultimately this will come to a head in a naval war that they'll fight with the Dutch, and for about a year, the Dutch will try to take New York back, but they will ultimately hand it back over to the English. So not everybody's happy about it in Europe, but most people in New Amsterdam were happy to hand things over to England. Does that make sense? All right. So the Navigation Acts, again, forbade colonial trade with competing countries other than England. This resulted in a great deal of smuggling, which became a colonial tradition. Not everybody from colony to colony followed the Navigation Acts, right? Like, if you dealt with a colonial governor or colonial officials that might have gotten some kickbacks, I'm not talking about parties here, I'm talking about money paid out like graft. If money was paid out to these people, they might turn a blind eye to the smuggling. But not everybody was. Some people were following the laws, and they were arresting smugglers, and they were being tried. Not a lot of smugglers got executed. It happened in some cases, but most smugglers, they got off, and they just kept doing what they were doing. And the Navigation Acts were, again, they were followed some places, they were ignored others. So James II wants to drop the hammer on that. So he brings in a military leader by the name of Sir Edmund Andros. Andros is a devout Anglican, and his goal is to come in and rule the New England colonies with an iron fist, as Stuyvesant had ruled New Amsterdam. This is what's interesting, guys. I want everybody to pay very close attention to this. The Dominion of New England is not the New England you're thinking about. The Dominion of New England is control over Massachusetts, Plymouth, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, New Haven, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. That is all of the Dominion of New England. All right? We're getting close to Pennsylvania getting going, but it's mainly that group that fell into the Dominion of New England. All right? So, some things happen. First off, he sets up his headquarters in Boston. This is going to infuriate the Puritans because they don't want an Anglican who's going to try to institute an established Anglican church in the Puritan colony. Number two, his soldiers had no respect for the local people. And there were constant squabbling between local Puritans in the city and his soldiers. Number three, curbs town meetings. 4, restricts courts and the press. 5, revokes land titles. And then, this is the one that really got them the most fired up, he taxes people in New England without their consent. You have to realize the way that the colonies taxed each other is not the way that you would think. There was people in the colonies weren't paying a British tax. Most colonies paid their own taxes. Like, they paid a tax to the church, and they paid local taxes to take care of things, and they paid taxes on goods coming in. So this right here, what does this look like? What does all that look like? 100 years early, or a little under 100 years early. Yeah, these are all the causes of the American Revolution, right? But not in 1774 and 1775, but in 1689. So this is why I said, like, it's a seed, it's like the seeds of revolution. The things that made the patriots angry leading up to the American Revolution made their grandparents and great-grandparents angry 2 generations, 3 generations before in the Dominion of New England. All right? So Andros was arrested. He was jailed by the Puritans. He was later released. He actually, his political career is not over. He'll go on and become royal governor in Virginia. He was actually pretty popular in Virginia. Not as popular as Lord Botetourt, so to speak. But why would he be more popular in Virginia? Any ideas? Yeah, Tristan. None. Yeah, well, maybe some, but probably not many. So he would have been in a colony that politically he would have aligned with as an Anglican. Another part of this, too, is he learns a hard lesson here. The man thinks he's going to die, right? So he handles Virginia a lot differently than he handled the Dominion of New England, all right? Another rebellion that I wanted to point out, and I know a lot of people out there are saying, what about Bacon's rebellion? We'll get there soon. I'm going to talk about that next lesson, because Bacon's rebellion actually occurs a little bit earlier than this in 1676 in Virginia. And again, that was a revolt against colonial rule. But this particular Boston revolt leads to Jacob Leisler's rebellion. Jacob Leisler was a German-American merchant who couldn't stand the Dominion of New England. So when the Boston Revolt occurred, he decided to revolt against Andros's lieutenant governor, Francis Nicholson, and Leisler made himself lieutenant governor of New York because the Glorious Revolution had kicked off, and he said, everything's going to be fine, I'm going to be restored, and they're not going to care that I overthrew this tyrannical lieutenant governor, and all will be well. All was not well for Jacob Leisler. Once William and Mary were crowned, they're going to send a royal governor over. Leisler will be arrested, tried for usurping power, and be executed. So things didn't work out the way Jacob Leisler had planned. Had anybody ever heard of the Leisler Rebellion? Good. We learned something today. So again, these are like Bacon's Rebellion, the Boston Revolt, the Leisler Rebellion. These are early rebellions in colonial America that occur 100 years to 70 years before the American Revolution. The Glorious Revolution, anybody in here researching the Glorious Revolution? Nobody? All right, cool. Glorious Revolution, remember, James II, the Duke of York, is the people sort of have a referendum. They raise up, they install William and Mary, William of Orange, King and Queen of England. They'll be crowned in Dublin, and James II will be cast out, and it leads to the collapse of the Dominion of New England as well. Massachusetts gets a new charter in 1791, and then also in that year they will absorb Plymouth into the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Here we have Sir Edmund Andros on the left, William and Mary on the right. Any questions about that? All right, now we're getting to what Ian was asking about here. Basically, the Dutch are going to revolt against Spain with the help of England, and in the 17th century, they are going to become a dominant trade empire. And they do so through 2 organizations. The Dutch East India Company, which was essentially like a private firm with a massive army. They are the oldest publicly traded company, right? And they were like the oldest, most original company on the stock exchange. They became so powerful because they were granted by the Dutch crown a 21-year monopoly on the spice trade. They traded in everything, and they drove their shipping prices down. So they had the lowest shipping prices. They were moving the most goods, you name it. Spices, slaves, gold, silver, anything agricultural, they were moving it. That is why they are going to hire Henry Hudson to find a Northwest Passage. The Dutch East India Company does not find a Northwest Passage, but they do stake a claim to present-day New York. They don't act on that claim. It's actually going to be a competing company that they worked with, who actually did more piracy than they did legit trade early on, the Dutch West India Company. The Dutch West India Company buys the land claim of Manhattan from the Lenape natives, who you know better as the Delaware tribe, in what would be considered one of the most incredible real estate purchases in the history of the world. $22 to $24 worth of trade goods and trinkets and beads for Manhattan, 22,000 acres of the world's most valuable real estate. New Amsterdam becomes really what we would consider a company town. It was all about merchant trade. It was about farming. It was run by both companies, even though they were competing, because they had Dutch interests, the VOC and the WIC. Both stick around until about the turn of the 19th century. Interest of stockholders internationally, so you have international investors. They gave out patroonships. These were like little carved out land grants, so like acre to 5, however many acreage plots, so to build houses, to farm. I'll show you what those patroonships looked like. They appealed to merchants, farmers, artisans. They attracted people of all types, religions, races. Even though there was the Dutch Reformed religion, they were pretty liberal when it came to religious freedom. A Jesuit missionary that visited New Amsterdam wrote that he had heard 18 different languages spoken in the streets of New Amsterdam, so this would really be considered an early melting pot in America. Over here on the right, we have the Dutch dealing for Manhattan with the Delaware. On the left there, that top symbol is the symbol for the Dutch East India Company, and on the bottom left, that's the symbol for the Dutch West India Company. The main tribe that the Dutch battled in and around Manhattan was a very powerful part of the Algonquian, the Mohican tribe. The Dutch got into the business of actually the policy of scalping Native Americans. The Dutch were the ones that started paying for scalps to try to eliminate their enemies. They also erected the wall in present-day Wall Street to defend against Native American attack, and they built a battery to protect themselves against European or Native American attack at the lower, where the east and west lower Manhattan converges at what is now called the Battery. That's where you could see the Statue of Liberty from the Battery today. The Swedes decided they wanted to try to get in and settle Dutch land, Dutch claims in the Delaware River Valley. They'll do so between 1638 and 1655. They'll establish forts along the river. The two strongest forts were Fort Trinity and Fort Christina, but the Dutch are going to come in, and they're going to send in a military leader by the name of Peter Stuyvesant, aka Pegleg Pete, who had lost a leg and had this silver-tipped wooden leg. He was much like Andros, an iron-fisted military leader who was not only sent over to crush the Swedes, but also to rule New Amsterdam as a military dictatorship. And he said, "I will rule you as a father does his children." And he did. In fact, that answers Ian's question, why in the world did the English easily take New Amsterdam? It's because the Dutch didn't want to live under military rule. They wanted to live free. They wanted to have, as many brothels and taverns that they could build and have some true autonomy in their colony. So that's what will lead to English rule. I love this map of New Netherland. You see canal systems were built, the wall for military protection, but you also see all the farming communities. You see these plots carved out, got Dutch architecture throughout. These are all patroonships, guys. These are all the little plots of land that were sold to settle. There's your battery at Fort Amsterdam. Thanks. Good to go here, looks like. Did you guys have any questions? This is the last thing I want to talk about. Jalen, what's up, buddy? Well, the problem was, like as in the Swedes, the problem, well, the Swedes actually do leave one lasting legacy, and that is they left the log cabin, but they didn't really have like a significant plan for commerce, so to speak. So were they going to go tobacco? Were they going to go agricultural goods? How are they going to make it? How are they going to survive? They didn't have a significant plan, where they also didn't have a significant trade company like what the Dutch had. So militarily, economically, and for those reasons, they weren't prepared to carve out a colony. But in addition to that, they just didn't have the people. They didn't have enough people to actually make it work. Exactly. I mean, they didn't have the people to produce, nor did they have the people to defend. Yeah. It's kind of like the early French attempts at colonizing Florida. It just fell apart. It didn't work out. They didn't have enough strength. Yeah. That's why I put that note in there. So Charles II, remember before he passes away, he'll send in the military to take New Amsterdam from Peter Stuyvesant, and he'll successfully do so. There will be one more, the New Orange attempt to retake New Amsterdam, but it won't work out. It'll fail. It'll happen a few years after English rule. Dutch culture, Dutch architecture, the Dutch traditions, they stuck around in New York. They're still there. Most everything named in and around New York has some sort of lineage to the early Dutch settlement. Patroonships and boroughs like Harlem, Brooklyn, Bronx, Hellgate, all those were Dutch. The Dutch architecture left a mark. Dutch cultural impact, Easter eggs, Father Christmas, bowling, sleighing, ice skating. I know I've got some golfers out there. Again, we can go down this road of like, we got Scotland, Ireland, the Dutch, all these European, this area of Western Europe loves to claim golf. Well, they can all have their different, they can all stake their claim to golf, but the Dutch bring golf over to New Amsterdam, and there's golf being played, form of golf being played in colonial America early on in the Middle Atlantic. And there we have the Duke of York, James II. Do I have any questions? Good questions, Jalen. Good questions, Ian. If anybody else has anything for me, please let me know. I'm going to pump the brakes here. And I would like for you guys to go to the